25th of August 1944. Paris is in complete confusion as a battle rages for the city. German troops remain in possession of several key areas and buildings in the city centre, while French and US forces, supported by the resistance, fight to liberate the French capital from 5 years of German occupation. Fortunately for this most beautiful of European cities, Paris is spared serious damage, though street fighting does occur in many parts of the centre, some of it involving German and French tanks. Moving through this dangerous confusion is a small column of jeeps, mounting an unlikely group of liberators. In the passenger seat of the leading jeep, a submachine gun in his lap, is famous American writer and war correspondent Ernest Hemingway, a tall, overweight 45-year-old superstar and pre-war Paris resident. He leads his own unofficial unit made up of war correspondents, resistance fighters, hangers-on, and OSS officers, dressed in a strange assemblage of military and civilian clothing and armed to the teeth with American, British, and French weapons. Breaking all the rules of war journalism, but Hemingway loves action and is determined not only to record the liberation of Paris for posterity, but also to take an active part in that liberation. Hemingway's little band had driven into Paris at noon on the 25th of August, accompanied by some OSS officers, and entered the heart of Paris over the Pont de Sèvres, moving towards the Arc de Triomphe, dodging German sniper fire on the way. Near the Bois de Boulogne, heavy German fire causes them to abandon their jeeps and seek cover. Free French troops neutralize the German position, and Hemingway's unit mount their jeeps again and drive on, the writer having a specific target in mind: liberation of his favorite hotel that contained his favorite bar. The hotel was the Ritz, probably the most famous in the world. Powering down the deserted Champs-Élysées, they stop briefly at the Travelers' Club, a private members' club in a large city mansion where Hemingway and his crew help themselves to champagne. Pushing on through the empty Place de l'Opéra, past the magnificent Opera Garnier, they stopped again at another of Hemingway's pre-war watering holes, the fashionable Café de la Paix, part of the Grand Hotel, where once all of the international film stars and writers of pre-war Paris had gathered. Chugging back some more champagne, the by now well-oiled Hemingway and his companions drove on down Rue Cambon to the back of the Ritz Hotel. Clutching a pistol in one hand, Hemingway pushed through the doors to be met by the hotel's manager, Claude Ozelot, who knew him from earlier times. Instead of fighting his way in against die-hard Germans, Hemingway was instead greeted respectfully by the hotel manager and asked politely to deposit his weapons before he and his men were shown into the bar, and a riotous champagne and wine-fueled party followed. His pre-war haunt, the hotel's main bar, has been named in his honor, today called Bar Hemingway, fitting as Hemingway and his pal, the writer F. Scott Fitzgerald, drank there often in the 20s and 30s, along with the other famous expats that called Paris home. As the liberators began to explore the Ritz, it would become clear from the management that the hotel had also been home to another larger-than-life character during the war years: Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, the corpulent and flamboyant head of the Luftwaffe, and from 1941 Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany. But unlike Hemingway, who came to Paris to help liberate it, Göring had come to Paris to rob it of its treasures. When Paris was occupied by the Germans on the 14th of June 1940, the various parts of the German military and security forces descended on the city to claim various French government buildings for their own use. They also snatched up the famous luxury hotels. The Hotel Maurice, opposite the Tuileries Gardens, became headquarters of the German military command of Greater Paris and home of the military governor. The Hotel Lutetia became Abwehr military intelligence headquarters. The Grand Hotel was taken over by the German army, and the Hotel Le Scribe by Dr. Goebbels' propaganda ministry. But Göring snatched the prize, the Ritz, for his Luftwaffe, and one wing of the hotel was requisitioned for use by the Luftwaffe High Command in France during the war, while the rest of the hotel continued to house paying guests. such as famous fashion designer Coco Chanel, and the occupiers shared the hotels, restaurants, and bars with the civilian guests. In fact, it became a rule at the Ritz that German officers would surrender their sidearms on entering the hotel, and they obeyed. Naturally, due to Göring's frequent visits to Paris, the Luftwaffe took over the most luxurious and largest suite in the Ritz for the Reichsmarschall, the Imperial Suite. This luxury suite measures over 200 square meters and consists of a living room and 2 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom and dressing room. There is also a private dining room and kitchen, all overlooking the Place Vendôme. Here we see Göring driving through Paris on his way to the Place Vendôme and the Ritz. He is driving in a Rolls-Royce 2530 Binder drop-head coupe, undoubtedly a car confiscated from some wealthy person in Paris by the Germans, and not a car actually owned by Göring. The Place Vendôme and the entrance to the Ritz Hotel are little changed from when Göring arrived in the 1940s. Some viewers may remember that Princess Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed stayed at this particular suite the night she died in 1997, and indeed it has seen a procession of the super famous and the super wealthy stay in it since it was first built, Hermann Göring being one of the more notorious residents of this particular set of rooms. Göring lived in the imperial suite in the manner of a Roman emperor, and a rather dissolute emperor at that. In the privacy of his rooms, the Reichsmarschall flounced about in ermine and mink-trimmed gowns, instead of his powder-blue uniforms. He wore diamond earrings, makeup, and exotic perfumes, and kept a crystal bowl filled with morphine tablets on a table beside an armchair, alongside another bowl filled with precious stones, emeralds, black pearls, opals, garnets, and rubies. He held private dinner and dance parties, at which Göring danced with both men and women, according to a member of the Ritz staff that witnessed this behavior firsthand. But Göring wasn't in Paris for pleasure, per se. He was also there for hard-nosed business. He was in fact masterminding one of the greatest thefts in history, the effects of which are still felt in 2025, 81 years after his last visit to Paris. Göring was a collector. He collected clothes and uniforms, medals and decorations, titles and positions and weapons, all with equal alacrity. He collected exotic jewels and exotic animals, and above all, fine art. In 1936, he had ordered the complete reconstruction of his hunting lodge outside Berlin in the Schorfheide into a vast country house he named Waldhof Kadenhall, after his first wife, a Swedish woman called Karin. As part of the rebuild, Göring had a 34-meter-long hall built, called the Grand Gallery, where he displayed many of his fine collections of artworks, paintings, sculptures, furniture, and tapestries, and so on, initially purchased legally, later obtained by more underhand methods. For once France was under Nazi control, Göring's avarice went into overdrive. In France were some of the finest art collections in the world, much of it owned by prominent Jewish families, such as the Rothschilds. A special unit had already been created by another senior Nazi called Alfred Rosenberg, who became Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories, a top Nazi that few people know of today. Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR, tasked to collect archives, books, and related materials to be studied by anti-Jewish academics at the so-called Institute for Research on the Jewish Question in Frankfurt. With the fall of France, the ERR went to work confiscating material from Jews and Freemasons. Also in summer 1940, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, who also had his own art looting unit, ordered the seizure of art collections of prominent French Jews, turning this task over to the German ambassador in Paris, Otto Abetz. However, Göring soon decided to stick his fat fingers into the pie, and in October 1940, using his considerable influence, had the ERR take over most of the art, antique furniture, carpets, tapestries, and other antiques, determined to enrich his own private collections, using his own Luftwaffe to provide manpower, transport, and so on a massive scale. The ERR set up a processing station for this loot at the Jeu de Paume, a gallery in the Tuileries Gardens near the Hotel Maurice. In this manner, the contents of 200 extremely important collections were processed through the Jeu de Paume. Göring made over 20 individual trips to Paris between 1940 and 1944, ostensibly on military business, visiting Luftwaffe units, attending military conferences, and so on. But it seems his primary interest was in making selections of art at the Jeu de Paume for two purposes. Firstly, art to be sent to Hitler for later exhibition in a so-called Führer Museum to be built in Linz, Austria post-war. This material actually being sent for storage at the famous Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria. The second was the selection of art for Göring's own collection at Carenhal. The figures speak for themselves. Between 1941 and 1944, Göring sent 56 individual items to Hitler's collection, while Göring obtained 875 for himself. A further 500 or so paintings, many by artists such as Picasso and Salvador Dali, were labeled as degenerate art, and hundreds were burned outside the Jeu de Paume on huge bonfires, whilst others were never seen again, simply disappeared into the black market of stolen art. A lot of the art looted and sent to Hitler ended up, as I said, at Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany, where much of it was recovered in 1945 by the Monuments Men, the special unit of art historians and other specialists that did so much to save the culture of Europe from destruction. A lot more, particularly paintings, ended up moved for safekeeping to the giant Outalsee salt mine in nearby Austria, where the future Führer Museum collection was recovered by US troops at the end of the war. Göring's huge stash went to Carenhal, and in April 1945, when his home was threatened by the advancing Red Army, the Reichsmarschall ordered it all packed aboard goods trains and moved south to Berchtesgaden, where Göring maintained another country house in the mountains above the Bavarian town. After paying his respects at the bombed-out Reich Chancellery in Berlin on the occasion of Hitler's 56th and final birthday on the 20th of April 1945, Göring made himself scarce and boarded his private luxury train, similarly packed with treasures and personal possessions, and also headed for Berchtesgaden, where a few days later he was officially disgraced and fell from power and influence, and was placed under house arrest by the SS. Moved to Austria by his guards to his castle at Mautendorf, his personal possessions and his huge art collections were left aboard 3 trains at Berchtesgaden station, where it was eventually captured by US troops, or some of it was captured. For in the chaos before the arrival of US troops, locals looted Göring's trains, looking mostly for food, alcohol, and clothing, and much of the art has never been seen again. But what was recovered has largely been restored to its rightful owners, though many museums even today hold art looted by Göring that remains in legal limbo land. One interesting aside to the story of Göring at the Ritz Hotel is that shortly after the war, Barbara Hutton, the Woolworths heiress, stayed at the Imperial Suite for a few days. She complained to the management that the bed had a large crater in the middle, the result of 20-plus visits by the Reichsmarschall during the war years. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.